Have you ever walked out to your cucumbers and noticed that the leaves are starting to look tired, while a few tiny insects have already found the soft new growth and then thought that you should buy another bottle from the garden store before the problem gets worse? I have made that mistake myself more times than I care to admit. By the time I reached for a product, the cucumber was often already under stress and I was trying to fix a problem that had been growing quietly for days. What changed the way I looked at this was a simple old habit that an older gardener showed me many years ago. He taught me to look at the plant before I reached for anything. He would turn over the leaves and check underneath. He would look at the newest growth and then feel the soil near the stem. If the plant was simply thirsty, he dealt with the water first. If the soil was staying wet, he looked at drainage. If the cucumber was mostly healthy but a few small pests were appearing or the leaves were beginning to lose their strength, he had another little method that cost almost nothing. He used the large leaves of horseradish to make a simple infusion and used it carefully as part of his cucumber care. I still use the same idea today because it fits the way I like to garden. I do not believe that one homemade mixture can cure every disease or rescue a badly damaged plant. That would be too good to be true. But when you notice trouble early, there is often no reason to panic and no reason to spend money immediately. A simple horseradish leaf infusion can be one gentle option to try while you continue taking care of the things the cucumber really needs. There is something important about this method, though. Most people think the secret is simply putting a lot of leaves into water and spraying the plant. That is where I used to make my biggest mistake. More leaves do not automatically make a better preparation, and using it too aggressively can create more problems than it solves. The real value begins before you make the infusion, because the first thing you need to learn is how to recognize the right moment to use it. And that small decision can make all the difference. For a long time, I made the same mistake that I still see in many gardens today. The moment a cucumber leaf looked a little pale, or I noticed a few tiny insects underneath it, I started thinking about what product I should buy. But I rarely stopped to ask why the plant was becoming weak in the first place. I would water more, add some fertilizer, sometimes try a spray, and then wonder why the cucumber still looked tired a few days later. The older I get, the more I understand that a garden usually does not need 10 different products for every little change. It needs someone who notices what the plant is saying and reacts before a small problem becomes a large one. A cucumber can still look mostly green while already losing strength. The new leaves may be smaller, the color may not be as deep, the edges may begin to change, or a few small pests may gather in the protected places underneath the leaves. These are the moments when I prefer to slow down instead of reaching for something strong. First, I check the soil because a cucumber that is thirsty can look weak even when there are no pests at all. Then I look underneath the leaves because that is where small insects often hide. I also check the newest growth because old damaged leaves can tell you what happened yesterday, while new leaves can tell you what is happening right now. An older gardener taught me this habit many years ago, and he had a simple rule that I still remember. If you wait until the whole plant looks sick, you have already waited too long. The horseradish leaf infusion belongs in that early stage. I use it as a simple garden aid when the cucumber is still mostly healthy, and I notice the first signs of weakness or small pest trouble. I do not treat it as a miracle cure, and I would never use it instead of proper watering, drainage, good air movement, or removing badly damaged plant material. That is important because the old methods work together with observation. They were not meant to replace common sense. What I like most is that horseradish is often already growing in the garden, so you are not buying another bottle or carrying another expensive product home. But there is one detail that makes a surprising difference, and it starts with the leaves themselves. If you simply grab every leaf you can find and make the strongest mixture possible, you may be making the exact mistake I once made. I learned this next part from a gardener who had been growing vegetables for longer than I had been alive, and he did not make a big ceremony out of anything. He would walk through the garden in the morning with an old bucket in one hand and a small knife in the other, and if the cucumbers needed attention, he dealt with them while the problem was still small. Horseradish was one of the plants he kept nearby, and he used the leaves in a very simple way. He did not believe that every insect was an enemy, and he never sprayed a healthy plant just because he could. He looked for the first signs that something was changing. When the cucumber leaves were still mostly healthy but small pests had begun appearing, or the plant seemed slightly weakened, he would prepare a mild leaf infusion and use it as part of his regular care. The thing I remember most is how little he used. He would choose fresh, healthy horseradish leaves and avoid leaves that were dirty, diseased, or badly damaged. He would tear or cut them into smaller pieces and place them in a clean container with water. Then he would let the leaves sit so the water could take on the natural compounds from the plant. He never tried to make the mixture as strong as possible because he understood something that many of us forget. Natural does not automatically mean harmless in every concentration. A plant that is useful in one situation can still be too strong for delicate cucumber leaves if you overdo it. That is why I prefer starting gently and testing a small area before treating the whole plant. This is an old habit that has saved me from plenty of unnecessary trouble. I prepare a small amount first and apply it to just a few leaves, especially if the cucumber variety is new to me, or the weather has been hot and sunny. Then I wait and watch the plant instead of assuming that more must be better. If the leaves remain normal, I know I can continue carefully. If the plant reacts badly, I stop. That patience may sound ordinary, but it is exactly what makes these old garden methods practical. You are not trying to overpower the garden. You are giving the plant a little help while you correct the real problem around it. And there is another part of this method that most people completely miss because they are so focused on the liquid itself. The way you prepare the leaves matters, but the way you inspect and treat the cucumber afterward may matter even more. Now, let me show you how I actually use the infusion, because this is where a simple old method can either become useful or become a mistake if you rush it. Once the horseradish leaves have stood in the water long enough, I strain the leaves out and keep the liquid for the garden. I do not add 5 other ingredients just because somebody says that a stronger homemade remedy must work better. I learned the hard way that with cucumber leaves you have to be careful because they are tender and they can react badly when you keep putting things on them without giving them time to respond. So I start with a small test. I choose one cucumber plant and apply a little of the infusion to just 1 or 2 leaves, preferably where I can watch them easily. Then I wait and look at those leaves before treating the whole plant. If they remain normal and there is no sign of damage, I know I can continue carefully. This little test costs nothing and it can save you from losing a healthy plant because you were too confident with a homemade mixture. I also pay attention to the weather. I do not spray in strong midday sunlight because wet cucumber leaves can become stressed when the heat is intense. Early morning or later in the evening is much better for this kind of work, especially when the air is calm and the liquid has time to settle instead of blowing away. And here's something most gardeners miss when they are trying to deal with tiny pests. They spray the top of the leaf because that is the part they can see, and then they walk away thinking the job is finished. I used to do exactly the same thing. Now I turn the leaves over and look closely at the underside because small insects often hide there where they are protected from sun and weather. If I find a few pests, I make sure the infusion reaches those areas instead of simply making the upper leaves wet. But I also know when to stop. If the cucumber is badly wilted from heat, if the soil is staying soaked, if the leaves are covered with serious damage, or if I suspect a real disease problem, I do not pretend that horseradish water will fix it. I deal with the basic problem first. The old method works best when it is part of good garden care, not when it is expected to replace it. And once I understood that, I discovered the most useful part of this routine was not actually the infusion itself. It was what I started doing every morning after using it. The next thing I want you to remember is that the infusion should never become an excuse to stop watching the cucumber itself. This is where most people make the mistake, because once they have a homemade remedy in their hands, they want to use it again and again, until every leaf looks perfect. I understand that feeling because I used to think the same way. Now I do something much simpler. After I apply the infusion carefully, I leave the plant alone and come back the next day to look at it again. I check the newest leaves first because fresh growth tells me whether the cucumber is still moving forward or whether it is struggling. Then, I turn over a few leaves and look underneath. If I find a small number of pests, I do not panic, and I do not immediately make the infusion stronger. I watch whether their numbers are increasing and whether the plant is producing healthy new growth. This little bit of patience is one of the old habits that saves more work than people realize. If the cucumber is weak because the soil is dry, I water it properly. If the ground is staying wet, I stop adding water and look at drainage. If the weather is extremely hot, I think about shade and moisture before I think about another treatment. In the garden, one problem can easily look like another. A thirsty cucumber can look like a cucumber attacked by insects, and a plant suffering from poor air movement can develop leaf problems that no homemade spray will solve. That is why I never judge the result by one leaf alone. I look at the whole plant. Is new growth appearing? Are the leaves holding their shape? Are the flowers developing normally? Are the pests becoming fewer, or are they spreading? These simple questions tell me what to do next. And there is another small habit I learned that costs absolutely nothing. I remove badly damaged leaves when they are no longer useful, and I keep fallen sick plant material away from healthy vines. I do not strip a cucumber plant bare because it still needs healthy leaves to grow and produce fruit. I simply remove what is clearly finished and leave the strong green growth in place. Most gardeners want a quick answer, but the old method taught me something different. The real advantage is not that horseradish suddenly solves every problem. The advantage is that it gives you one simple option while you keep control of the rest of the garden. And once you start checking the plants this way, you begin to notice one final detail that can tell you whether the cucumber is truly recovering or only looking better for a short while. After I use the infusion, I do not stand there expecting the cucumber to change in an hour because gardening does not work that way, and I think that is one of the reasons people become disappointed with simple methods. I give the plant time and then I look for small signs that tell me what is really happening. The first thing I want to see is healthy new growth. Old leaves that were already damaged may never look perfect again, and that is fine. I am more interested in whether the newest leaves are opening normally and whether the vine is continuing to grow. If the small pests were the problem, I look underneath the leaves again and compare what I see with the day before. Sometimes the numbers are clearly lower, and sometimes they are still there, which tells me that I need to keep watching instead of pretending the first treatment solved everything. This is where many gardeners lose patience. They make a homemade preparation, use it once, and expect every insect to disappear permanently. I have learned not to think that way. A garden is changing every day, and insects can return from nearby plants or arrive from somewhere else. The useful habit is early inspection and calm repeated care when it is actually needed. I also keep an eye on the weather because a cucumber under stress from heat or dry soil needs water and protection before anything else. If the weather has been wet for several days, I pay more attention to air movement and the condition of the leaves because moisture can create another kind of trouble. This simple routine costs nothing, and it tells me whether I am dealing with pests or with a completely different problem. And there is another reason I like using a plant that is already growing in the garden. I am not buying a separate product for every small change I see. I am using what is available while keeping my expectations realistic. The infusion becomes one small part of the work rather than the whole solution. I still remove badly damaged leaves when they are no longer useful, and I keep the area around the cucumber reasonably clean. I still water properly and make sure the vines have enough room for air to move through them. When I do all of that together, the plants usually have a much better chance of staying productive. The result I am looking for is not a perfect leaf on every plant. It is a cucumber that keeps producing healthy new growth instead of slowly losing strength. And once you see that difference, you begin to understand why the old gardeners cared so much about catching trouble early, because the final result is often decided long before the garden looks seriously damaged. After using this method for years, I have come to one simple conclusion. The infusion itself is only a small part of the result, and the real advantage comes from noticing the cucumber while it still has the strength to recover. When I walk through my garden now, I do not just look for cucumbers ready to pick. I look at the newest leaves, I turn a few leaves over, I check the soil around the stem, and I pay attention to whether the vine is continuing to grow normally. If I see the first signs of weakness or a few small pests, I can respond early and calmly instead of waiting until the whole plant looks damaged. The horseradish leaf infusion gives me one inexpensive option that I can prepare from something already growing in the garden, and that is one of the reasons I still like this old method. There is no expensive bottle to buy and no complicated equipment sitting in the shed, but I always remember that simple does not mean careless. I choose healthy leaves, prepare the infusion gently, test it on a small area first, and watch the cucumber before I decide whether more treatment is needed. I never make the mixture stronger just because I want faster results, and I never keep spraying a stressed plant when the real problem is dry soil, poor drainage, extreme heat, or another condition that needs attention first. That is probably the most important lesson I can leave you with. The older gardeners did not expect one homemade preparation to solve every problem. They watched the plants and repeated the small things that kept them healthy. If your cucumbers are still mostly green but beginning to look tired, if you notice those first little insects hiding underneath the leaves, or if the new growth does not look as strong as it did a week ago, take a closer look before you spend money on another product. You may already have what you need for a simple garden routine growing nearby. And once you begin looking at the plants this way, you will notice that the same habit helps with tomatoes, peppers, squash, and many other crops, because weak growth usually gives you a warning before the real trouble becomes obvious. I have spent enough seasons in the garden to know that the cheapest solution is not always the best solution. But I also know that simple solutions deserve a fair chance when they are used carefully and with realistic expectations. So keep watching your leaves, keep your garden balanced, and remember that the next useful method may be growing right beside the one you just discovered.